before we get into thicker things, we must, of course, first acknowledge and pay our respects to the owners of this land that we are very privileged and honored to be able to meet and connect on, the Parramatta people of the Durag Nation. The Parramatta people have close ties to the land, and in particular, the Parramatta River, which flows through this area that we're meeting on. They source a lot of their food from there and also used it as a trade route. So it's very fitting that we're here today and able to source that kind of energy from the land and from the river that passes through here, and also trade thoughts and ideas and energy with each other. To be able to share space that they once walked on and still walk on is truly an honor. To be able to share our experiences and our energy and our thoughts on this land is truly an honor as well. We also acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and future, and extend that acknowledgement and respect to Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islanders, and all First Nation peoples that are here with us today and that are tuning in via broadcast. As a visitor myself, it's super important to present that. And also super important, I acknowledge my Pacifica heritage and the ancestry, and thank the powers that be that brought my people here to this country safely. Finally, we acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Just this morning when I arrived, we were given the sad news that Uncle Wes Mann, AM, had passed away. So, I think it's very fitting that we have to acknowledge his contribution and him as First Nations, as a human being. He's an Aboriginal elder, Bingambul man, storyteller and poet, and has strong ties to the Darug community. I'd also like to read a short poem that he had written called Mother Earth. The next time we look at a picture of a warrior of this land, look for the one behind him, for the one that is always on hand, for she is the eternal companion, the one we never see, and she is the reason that life goes on and her children are at her knee. Rest in peace, Uncle Wes. Again, welcome everyone to Contain Strong Language, Poetry of the Pacific. Let me put this paper down. You're getting in my way. A celebration of creative, passionate, and inspired minds and souls of those of the Pacifica diaspora, such as myself. My name is Langomia Hau Latukefu. I was born on Ngunnawal country, Canberra, to Tongan parents who arrived in the 60s. I have a love for words, I have a love for hip hop, and for my people. So I'm honored to share space with you, everyone that has come through, and some or that have joined us. Let me welcome our wonderful guests directly to my left, representing Boogie Down Bankstown, Samoan Australian, currently working as the project officer of the UTS Pacifica program, and is the secretary of the Australian Pacifica Educators Network. A poet, a writer, and a member of the Sweatshop Literacy Movement. Please welcome Christine Afoa. On the left of her, representing Taranaki to Perth and everywhere in between, it's an Aotearoa trickling sands of time left by ancestors of all. That's Daley's, I was about to say, it is left, right? Yeah, on the left. We're representing Maui County, Tongan Australian, General Manager of Sweatshop Literacy Movement. This year released her debut novel, Dirt Poor Islanders. Please welcome Winnie Dunn. As you can see, and last and definitely not least, representing Blacktown, also Tongan Australian. Oh, we have Blacktown in the house today? Yeah. She won the 2021 Mayoral Creative Writing Prize with her poem, O Daughter of Oceania. Last year, released her first children's book, I Am Lupe. Please welcome Sela Ahosivi-Atiola. Unfortunately, Mel Ree is unable to join us as planned. She's tending to some family matters, so we send our thoughts and our love and blessings to her and the family. Okay, that was a real long intro. Sorry about that. It was longer than I anticipated. But you got to set the scene, you got to set the correct setting. Let's start off with something light. We can go, as I said in the green, we can start off we can enter heavy spaces. We want to create a safe space. You can go as heavy as you want, as light as you want. But let's start off light, get the blood flowing and the mind kicking into gear. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Oh.
We'll start off with you, Christine.
This is going to be so terrible, but I had a mandarin, and I had to half it, and I was mad.
Who did you half it with?
With my driver. I was like, I'm Parramatta, and here you go. that was me.
Daley?
Okay.
I'm running on fumes this morning. I've had a single double espresso. Black coffee represent. I'm going to try and fuel myself with something else later. Got it from Burke Street Bakery just down the road. So it's pretty good this morning.
I'm also running on caffeine only, so one stovetop, and then I had...
During a workspace or before you start writing, any kind of brain food or anything like that?
How did you have breakfast?
Yeah, I just had a coffee myself.
Hey!
So I'm all good, but I have 2 children, so I'm already up and at 'em early. But yeah, is there a particular meal, a go-to that, okay, I need this before I start kicking into action?
Coffee is the answer to everyone's question. I'm actually reading a couple of books actually about the process of writing is a very spiritual experience. So the late African-American feminist and scholar Bell Hooks talks about the fact that there's some writers who are inexplicably drawn, and it's just this unknowable force that moves within them. And I know that sounds a bit woo-woo, but I always felt that way as a person. And one of my favorite stories that my dad ever told me was that one time he walked into the lounge room and I was staring very intently at the back of like a 48-pack toilet paper from Aldi's. And I was staring, I was like 6 or something, and I was just staring very intently at it. And for a long time, he was looking at me and he couldn't understand what was going on, why I was so focused. But then he realized I was trying to read the words on the back of the toilet paper packet. And my dad told me, from then on, I knew that you were going to read and write. And he just knew that about me. And also, my birth mum died when I was quite young, when I was 4. And she was the only one in my family, those past and present, who wrote in a diary every day. And so I actually have the diary of hers from the year I was born, 1995, which is just filled out every day with her very messy, loopy handwriting that's not unlike my own. And, for me, writing, going back to kind of food and stuff, obviously it's important, we have bodies, but I rarely ever think about my flesh prison whenever I'm coming to the page or to writing, because for me it's kind of that bell hooks thing of this unknowable thing that I'm drawn to.
Yeah, let's talk. I was going to head into that as it is part of the ritual, like having particular foods. But yeah, let's talk about the rituals before you go into a creative state. Some people like the room has to be super clean, or there's a particular kind of medium they need to use. Sela, let's talk about that. But before you talk about that, I forgot to mention that this will be broadcasted through ABC. Shout out to the ABC crew. Yeah, ABC crew in the house. So people are going to hear this through audio. So if you feel like you want to Yahoo, Chihu, stand, clap, please do. Make some noise so not only will these wonderful people feel warm and fuzzy inside, but the people at home will be able to hear it as well. So yeah, back to you, Sela, like your ritual before heading into creative space.
I don't think there's necessarily a ritual. Before I write, I think about what I want to say and if it's worth saying, and then I begin to write. But I write first and try to make it as polished as possible, go through drafts, and then I bring my writing to, my editor, and most of the time my editor is Winnie. And this is something I've learned from Winnie, is that writing can only be done in community, good writing. And so, it's this process of thinking about whether I've got something worthwhile to say. And it's a real privilege to be able to write, and I think with that privilege comes responsibility. And as a Tongan woman, and as, a Pacific Islander, a daughter of Oceania, I want to be able to write stories that, are worth saying, that are bringing issues to the fore. And so it's not necessarily a ritual. It's more of what message I want to get across to everyone.
I love that we're talking about ritual, but also food, because what comes to mind is like a Sunday feast after Mass. And for me, especially like writing something that I know, I write about like my family, I write about community, and I write about what I feel very deeply. And you can't write a story if you don't collect those stories. So a lot of the times my aunties and my uncles, my parents are like main characters, often without them knowing. But yeah, my process is quite similar to Sela's, where my editor is also Winnie.
The hardest working person in showbiz, Winnie Dunn.
Put them on blast. But it's so important to acknowledge those who open the door for you. And in writing our stories, we hope that we help the next generation to open doors as well.
Sorry.
I'll pass it around. There we go.
Yeah, it's not really a ritual as such, but like the best stories and the things that matter come to you in the middle of those conversations. Those like either sun-filled or coffee-filled or food-filled, feast-filled, conversations. And it's almost like you want to go away right then and write something, but the part of that responsibility, I think, as you were saying there, is to sit with that. And sometimes the story is just that conversation or that connection or that just listening. Like not every story has to be written down, as a lot of our people know. That sometimes you have the responsibility to then hold on to that story and hold it within yourself. And then if it needs to be spoken or shared in an oral sense, then you can find your way through that. But ultimately, it's just the responsibility to hold on to that, and then that story will find the form. I have a little ritual. It's just peppermint tea for me, like kawa kawa, if I can get my hands on it. But your peppermint from Coles will do too, and just drink that all day. But I also try to. A lot of my poetry comes after I spend some time playing putorino, so like a tongapuro, like Maori instruments. So sometimes the poetry and the stories come through song first, come through the air, and it sounds a little bit like. But for me, because
that's almost like freestyling for rappers, right? You're just going with the energy and the feel of the room and the music.
100%, and because the Tonga are our ancestors, like they are alive, they're with us. Like within those times where you can't necessarily access community or can't access, like I can't always afford to fly back to New Plymouth and New Zealand, prices are way too high. But in those moments, I just sit with that instead. And it's not even connecting from afar, it's connecting in that moment with something greater than yourself. And I think that's the thing, is that you're saying, it's like spending, like sometimes it's just a year sitting with something and going, am I the right conduit for this? And often the answer's like, no, right? That's what I find at least. And then you just move on because it's not necessarily yours. No story is just yours, but you're not necessarily the right being at the right time to communicate that.
And how do you deal with that? Like, when you're kind of trying to figure that out, am I the right conduit? And then when you kind of like, oh, maybe I'm not. Like, how does that sit with you?
Sing it, say it, speak it, share it, and then if there's that niggling feeling inside you, listen to that. Because as a lot of us know, that's something else speaking to you. And it's like, don't ignore, like sit in the uncomfortability, but don't ignore when something's trying to communicate. It's like going outside and listening to the trees and the sun and everything around you, like listen. And I was asked a question yesterday about the difference between listening and reading. And I think it's the difference between just being in the world and trying to make sense of the world. One will come if you spend time in the other.
Winnie, did you want to add to that question? Any kind of rituals before reading 500 pieces of work to edit?
Well, yeah, I think I kind of already talked about my spiritual connection maybe to writing, so I'll bring it down to a more practical sense. I'm also an editor, which is part of my role at Sweatshop Literacy Movement. And so for those who may not know, Sweatshop is a literacy movement based in Western Sydney dedicated to empowering First Nations writers and writers of colour through reading, writing and critical thinking. We take our ethos from the late African American feminist and scholar Bell Hooks, who argues that we can't have freedom and justice in any culture unless we are focused on mass-based literacy movements, because degrees of literacy determine how we see what we see. And so, you know, for me, the being an editor is really important because it helps me, it allows me access to other people's stories, which is a privilege, and to be able to help them shape that stories with messages that they're wanting to tell. And so for me, if you're wanting to be a professional writer, because anyone I think can write on a piece of paper or write for personal, means, but if you're wanting to be a writer professionally, it has to be done in community. It has to be done with editors. And so what I love at Sweatshop is that when we're doing a workshop, we actually sit in a circle. Balangers would call it the Socratic method, but we call it Dalanoa, in which you're just sitting in a circle, having your time to say your piece, and then actually getting feedback from the community about how to improve your storytelling. And for me, being a writer being a writer means also being an editor and being open to edits and being open to redrafting. And then if you're focused on the craft and getting that right, then the messages come and the purpose of the writing, I think, comes naturally after that. But, you know, my focus as an editor and as a writer is tell the best story you can in the best way that you can tell it, and the meaning and the purpose will naturally form from that.
As someone in your position, is it hard to switch between, okay, I'm in editor mode, I'm in writer mode, and things bleeding into each other? I know like things would naturally feed into all areas of your life and creative space, but are there times where you're like, I can't afford to think right now in this way, I need to edit these pieces?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own different method, and mine is that I just, when I was writing Dirt Poor Islanders, I gave myself the task of writing 200 words a day, and sometimes that would take me an hour, sometimes that would take me 12 hours. It was just dependent on how easily the words were forming, and how much my editorial mind was reading over the work that I was writing. But I actually write and edit simultaneously. I don't know how to do it any other way. And, you know, for me, I know I write autobiographical fiction, so I already have the cast and characters and setting in mind, the action, the plot point. And then for me, it's always a joy to just, you know, remember that, you know, my story is my own. It's just one part of the community. And for me, you know, the more Pacific Islanders that are telling stories, and that's important, because otherwise we just have Chris Lilly. We all know he's a white guy who put on brown face paint and an afro wig and enacted violent, illiterate, hypersexual depictions of a Tongan child. I think people often forget that he was playing a young high school boy. And so, it's not like when I'm writing, I'm sitting there staring at a picture of Chris Lilly as
On the dartboard.
angrily. But that's what I mean by if you're focused on the storytelling, that natural response back to Chris Lilly, and that natural, reclamation of, a Tongan Australian story, that, reclaiming that from him, comes naturally. But, as a writer, if you're wanting to write, you really, really need to be focused on the craft. Like, that should always come first.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because it reminds me of, what Winnie's just said about Chris Lilly. It reminds me of this Nigerian writer named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She talks about the dangers of a single story or a single narrative, and that if you tell or show a story of a place or a group of people as one thing and only ever one thing over and over and over again, that's what they become. And so it creates these stereotypes, or they continue to perpetuate these stereotypes. And the thing with stereotypes is, it's not that they're necessarily untrue. I think it's that they're incomplete. And we see that with Chris Lilly, is that he's presented, our children as very one-dimensional, and really ignores just how complex we are as Tongans, especially when you consider our culture and our histories. And so there is so much power in being able to tell other Tongan Australian stories.
Going back to what gets you into a creative space, you all mentioned about having those conversations and relationships, and I often think, with musicians in particular, that they have a lot of nervous friends, because they have these conversations, and their creative friend is like, this could be a good song, or could be a good poem, could be a piece for a play. Your people immediately around you that may not be in a creative space, like, how do they feel about when you have these kind of conversations, and do they think, I don't want to be part of your next book?
I mean, they have no choice. But I think we just have a duty to tell that story as authentically and as truthfully as we can. And I mean, Winnie tells us this all the time, but it's
Winnie's like, oh no.
I know. But she talks about the truth of a moment, and how as soon as a moment happens, it's past. So what you write from it, or what comes out of your heart about that moment, is fiction, and it becomes your story. My family listening to this will be like, what? I don't know. Did you want to talk on your words?
I just spoke, so
I
I'll
love
let
that.
others speak, and then I'll come back. But yeah.
No,
Everyone
but,
can jump in, whenever you feel like. Don't
Yeah.
feel like I need to, like, oh no, it's over to you.
I mean, I'll just add briefly as well, like any poem or piece or text or whatever story I'm telling, it's not the direct kind of retelling of something that existed. It's always like my lens. I can't escape that, but it's just acknowledging that and going, am I putting bias onto this? Am I doing the responsible thing? Was I listening? So I think it's almost like everything is a fiction. Even what we understand as non-fiction kind of is a fiction, right? There's always a bias there, and that's what we experience with history and the retelling of histories, and then certain oral stories passed down which conflict with histories. It's just competing fictions at the end of the day, but somewhere in the midst or the mist of those competing fictions is some kind of truth, but each truth is then going to be different for each individual person. So it's just like all you can do is just listen and feel like it's the right way to communicate that. But there's always a chance that it's going to that someone's going to disagree with it or have their own opinions on it or feel like you're not doing the right thing. And then in that moment, the ego rises up and the defenses come up a little bit. But again, it's always listening. You don't have to sit there and agree, but you have the responsibility to sit there and listen to that, because that's an ancestor in front of you keeping you accountable, which is kind of the most important thing to keep moving forward, right? And that's just not if I'm writing a work that's specifically cultural, whatever that means as well, because there are many different types of ancestors and communities, and I find myself at this weird intersection of a whole different bunch of them, and a whole bunch of different people to be responsible to in a whole bunch of different ways. But I think what I find within the practice of storytelling is that if I'm listening in the right way, hopefully that just makes me a better community member away from my art, and actually just doing the labor of serving in other ways as well. Because engaging in storytelling. I'm going to keep going on about listening, because I had a great
Feel free, man.
overnight hallucination about
Let it
listening.
flow.
But yeah.
My answer's pretty long, so bear with me. Last night I was listening to Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar, and there's this very not well-known song on the album that's called, I think it's Sing About Me, Dying of Thirst. And the first part of that, it's like a 12-minute song. The first part of that 12-minute song is Kendrick is writing lyrics about two perspectives. One is this kind of friend that he has who's stuck in this kind of gang lifestyle, and he's telling Kendrick, before I die, I want you to write a song about me and I want to hear it. But by the end of that stanza, I would say, it ends in the sound of gunshots. So the character in that song actually dies before he's able to hear the song. And that weighs really heavily on Kendrick. The second part of that song, which is like the third stanza, I think, is about a girl who's his friend, who's known for a long time, who's a sex worker, and has gone through horrible situations in her life growing up in Compton. And she's telling Kendrick, in this song, don't write about me. I don't need you to do that. I've got my own problems. I have enough problems. I think there's even a line in there like, why are you putting me on blast and shit? And so for me, when you're writing for the public forum, you sit on a spectrum. On one end, I can write any story, anytime, whenever I want, about anything. And the other end of the spectrum is I can't write anything because I'm going to hurt someone or harm someone, so I better just not write at all. And those are two very extremes that not many writers sit at, if any. We usually sit somewhere in the middle. There's some stories we feel comfortable telling, and there's some stories that we don't feel comfortable telling. And that's for each writer to make their own assessment as to what they're comfortable with writing. When you're writing autobiographical fiction, for me, that's every piece of writing that's ever existed. People often think that writing comes from the universe, it's infinite, you can just take whatever information from there and you're kind of this lone genius in a cave. That's just a myth and simply not true. We are so limited to what we know, to our lived experiences. And an example I use, is J.K. Rowling. We all know she wrote Harry Potter, mythical, magical, Hogwarts, witches and wizards, dragons, that's as magical as you can get, right? But even in something like Harry Potter, we can see that all of the characters are from a white background, all of them are cisgendered, all of them are heterosexual. There is, a kind of male hero at the center of the story. And so we can see, even in something as mythical as Harry Potter, that the world is still informed by J.K. Rowling's politics and the way that she exists in the world. And, you know, if some people don't believe me, like, Winnie, that's way too political, that's just your own interpretation. I'll give you a more personal one. There's interviews of J.K. Rowling where she's talking about when she was writing The Prisoner of Azkaban, it was during a time where her mother had died. So she was experiencing a lot of grief. And so while she was writing The Prisoner of Azkaban, she actually thought up the characters of the Dementors, who are these beings who suck the joy and the life and the happiness out of you. And that was a metaphor for the grief that she was experiencing when her mother died as she was writing the book. And so for me, every piece of writing is autobiographical fiction. It's just whether or not the writer is being honest about it or not. And so the advice I gave to Christine and the advice I give to all the writers that I work with at Sweatshop is that the present moment is gone as soon as it happens. And when we recall it in our memories or when we're retelling it to another person, like even what we had for breakfast today, it's curated. It's from our own perspective. You know, I didn't talk about the fact that, you know, my neighbor was outside on the balcony while I was making my coffee. I didn't talk about the fact that, you know, I was sweating trying to get ready and spilt coffee on the kitchen floor. You know, I didn't say any of that, right? But those are factual things that happened this morning to me. But I chose to omit them when I was answering the question. So everything is fiction, even if you think you're talking from a place of truth and reality. And so I find that actually really, really free. And also in the simple fact that if you're a writer, I would say a real writer, you have to write like you're dead. So you have to write unafraid of the consequences, because you know that the craft and the writing and the story is more important than any personal issues that you might face. And, you know, I say that knowing that my parents and 7 out of 8 of my siblings don't talk to me anymore because of my book, because they haven't read a fiction book since primary school, and trying to explain to them that the kind of oxymoron that exists in the phrase autobiographical fiction is something that they will never understand. And, you know, in our cultures, it's frowned upon to put shame on the family, or to tell your, or to show the darker parts, you know, of our culture and our experiences. But for me, even if I got up and just pretended everything in the Tongan community was wonderful and we're all amazing, those dark parts, you know, still exist. You know, suicide rates are so high. Youth suicide rates are so high in the Pacific Islander community. You know, why is it that all of us are you know, less than 1% of us go to tertiary education? Why, you know, why is it that a lot of our men can only find, you know, purpose and meaning on a football field? You know, why does that exist? And so those things still exist whether I choose to talk about it or not. So I choose to actively talk about it because for me, and this is an example I use when I'm talking to other Pacific Islanders about writing and getting courage to write from their own story, is that the natul, right? It's a mat made out of mulberry bark that's flattened. There's many layers. The top layer is very shiny. It's patterned beautifully with very dark ink. And it's the side that you present to others when you are gifting the natul.
Very decorative, yeah.
Very decorative. But underneath it, the bottom layer of the natul, it's bleached, it's starchy, it's messy, and it doesn't look great. But you need that bottom layer, you need that ugly layer of the natul to be able to present the beautiful parts. And so, you know, for me, whether or not my family gets it or not, or whether or not the broader Australian readership gets Dirt Poor Islanders or not, you know, I just knew that I had to tell the darker parts of my culture and my community, you know, in Australia, to be able to show the beautiful, nuanced and complicated parts and have them really shine through.
Yeah.
beautifully said. I'm glad you brought up expectations and community and culture. As we all belong to a community, whether it's Pacifica, whether it's the area we grew up in, whether it's the friendship circles that we're in, and we're always running into responsibilities and obligations. How we're expected to walk, how we're expected to talk, how we're expected to react to certain things, and which can be super challenging, especially in our chosen fields where it's very expressionative, it's very vulnerable. I'll start with you, Christine. What has been the challenges of kind of, I guess, coming out of your show and being able to feel that sense of freedom in what you do?
Oof, what a big question. There's a Samoan proverb, and it's ole ala lipole ole tautua, and it means the path to leadership is through service. And I think what drives me forward in coming out and expressing myself through all my intersections, whether that's queer space, whether that's being Pacifica, whether that's being a woman, is thinking about that service. You know, being raised in a Samoan culture, but someone who's also from Bankstown, you are given duties and you perform them to get the love of your parents, but you also feel like I matter, you know, and I'm doing something worthy, and someone's watching that, and they will feel like a sense of purpose too. So I feel like it sounds so convoluted, like the way I've explained it, but that's like, if I fulfill that service, then I hope to inspire others to do the same. I think that's my drive.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because my mother's quite progressive, and some of the things I do, she's like, "Oh, son, you know, have family." I'm like, "Man, this is your fault. You brought me up to be like that. You should be more proud than anything." But Sela, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think it comes back again to service. It gets quite complicated for me because my dad is a minister, so he's a whaiwhika, and with that comes this added expectation, and being the oldest daughter too in a Tongan family.
It's a double whammy right there.
Yeah, it is. It's a double whammy. But I think I didn't feel the confidence to do that until I became a mother. And I think as a mother, I've got this responsibility to be some kind of representation for my children. And so I understand when I share my craft and I share my art and my writing that there's consequences that come with that from the wider community. But my children have something to look up to, as you know, as corny as that sounds.
Oh, for sure.
It's beautiful.
Daley,
Not
you
corny.
I don't really have too much to add. Like, it's just a constant journey. Like, there's always shame. Like, it's always there. And I think some of my shame comes from language, or like not being confident with the words, because that's ultimately part of my responsibility, is to ensure that certain languages and certain parts of language and stories don't die, or at least that I do all I can to pass them on. But then that shame is just something that's spurring me on. Like, I can't just sit in that shame. I have to actively do something about it.
Have you come to a point where you've used that as fuel, or is it always still kind of that niggling feeling, like not cowering, but you know, kind of puts you back in the show a little bit? It's
100% a fuel. That's the thing. Like for me, unfortunately, shame is I'm fueled by injustice, as my bio says, but I think it's actually shame. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's just something that you have to confront head on and sit by the fire and let it warm you rather than scare you off. Kind of the poetic way around talking about that one there. But I think, as Winnie said as well, just commit to learning more about how to do that, and listening and reading and hearing other stories, and figuring out that what my way is to form that shame into something useful. Because also that shame's not always useful. Sometimes that shame is just something that you need to like deal with, or talk to someone about, and not be afraid to just be honest. Because I think I've found, like, I spent a lot of time living over in Perth, did high school there, and I didn't really have many people around me. I kind of was very alone. Even in the last 2 years, like moving over here and being a little bit closer to like home as well, or a sense of whatever home is, just getting ever more confident to just be honest with myself and each other. And there's always going to be like consequences sometimes, or whatever that means as well. But just being a little bit less afraid each day. And I don't think I'll ever not be afraid until I'm on, my last legs, as it were. And, but that's okay, because I'll just return to the earth. The earth will always love you. As much as that's like if there's someone who loves you, it's just the ground.
Unconditional love.
She's hungry.
We're talking about processes of that, those communities. What about the unlearning and the relearning? Like, how have you come to that point where you've had to unpack a lot of the stuff that you were taught as kids, and you thought that's just how it is, but then you get to a certain point in your life and you're like, well, actually it doesn't have to be like that, or it actually isn't like that. How's that process been for you? So Winnie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, as Sela was saying, I'm also the oldest girl in my family, and in Tongan culture that comes with a lot of roles and responsibilities. I'm meant to be in complete service to my parents and my siblings, and that often comes in a practical sense of staying at home, working full time, rather than pursuing education or further education, giving a certain amount of your pay slip to your parents, funerals, weddings, the house, and you can accumulate a lot of debt that way. And I know we're running out of time. So my overall answer to learning and unlearning is that the anthropologist, the Lebanese Australian anthropologist Ghassan Haj, talks about the fact that whether or not white Australians think or accept that Australia is multicultural, Australia is multicultural whether they want it to be or not, whether they think it is or not, right? And so for me, I'm Tongan, whether other Tongans or other Pacific Islanders believe that or not, whether my family believes that or not, whether I myself believe that or not. Whatever I do is Tongan and is a contribution to the culture. And, I dedicated Dirt Paw Islanders, to my aunt, who's also named Winnie, who's sitting in the front over there. She's the first Tongan woman in Australia to get married to another woman. She's also the oldest girl in her line of siblings. And, I take my inspiration from the fact that, she's also mixed race. She's from the rainbow community. She's broken all these rules, but she's so Tongan. She taught me all the myth stories that I know. She taught me, my culture, even when I was so reluctant to do it and to know about it. And so for me, being a writer, being Tongan, I'll always be that.
I don't have anything.
I just wanted to add, to link back to what we were speaking about before, that whole unlearning process is so important for us to reclaim our stories, because what exists isn't always stories told by us for us. It's the Chris Lillies, and I hate giving him time, but it's so important. So yes, and I love that.
Daley, do you want to?
Yeah, if Chris Lilly can be Tongan, I can be. No, literally.
You all speak very articulate and eloquently, and we could sit here for hours, but I'm sure you probably want to eat as well, fueled on coffee. But before, I think we have just under 10 minutes. I have a lot of questions too, but I think it's important that we have everyone involved as well. So if anyone has any questions you would like to ask the panel, please raise your hand, because we want everyone to feel included. And if there's any kind of burning questions that anyone wants to ask. Yeah. Okay, I'll repeat. I've got to repeat the question too, so make sure it's kind of a bit visual.
Oh, sorry. And forgive me, this is just an amalgam of thoughts that have just come up. And dedicated to Winnie, who has said such brilliant things. And thank you so much. There's something that flags, though, in terms of your story. And I have purchased the book, so you probably have answered it, but hoping that you'll sort of elucidate some more sort of thoughts. Everyone can purchase the book at the library, at the bookstore outside. Enough said. Also by I Am Look Bear, which is the first Tongan Australian children's book. Daley's poetry collection isn't there apparently, but please go buy it. And then if you're interested in the works of Sela and Christine, they're also published in anthologies by Sweatshop, so sweatshop.ws is the place to go. Just doing solid, allyship and supporting Islander voices, even when you are artists of your own pressure. So thank you so much for doing that. Winnie, you spoke about why is it that Tongan people are footballers, or why is it that we're only representing 1% of, in academic institutions. There's a quote that I sort of really think about and reflect on my own experiences. I think it goes something like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then the fish will always think that it is stupid. So in terms of living in Australia and having a metric of what does success look like, being sort of judged upon us, that I think sometimes we can often internalize that. So even in my own experiences, I guess when you're telling your story, I wonder where systemic racism comes into it. Because when I think about literary institutions, they're not spaces that are open to our culture and oral sort of, stories that are being told there. We are judged by a metric that is outside of that. I also think about what it feels like to be, and you're talking about high rates of suicide, but for Tongans in Australia. But I think about what it means to be judged by a standard and deemed less worthy every single day of our lives, and what does that do? And is that our culture, or is that the society that has actually sort of caused a response like that? And so we are killing ourselves because the environment that we're in isn't sort of an environment that we can thrive in. And I, as a person, it's funny that you say that football story. I remember walking out of my sort of library when I was in year 9, and I was walking out of the library with my sort of white friends that I was walking with, and the PE teacher comes directly to me
Yep.
in this very curvy, non-sporty body and says, "Would you like to be on the football team?"
Coming out of the library. Yeah.
What gave you that vibe?
Circle surrounded by squares. What was it in him that thought that I had the skill sets, right? So, when you were told, and I love that TED talk about having a single story, and that, yes, it might be one story, but it's not the complete story, and what it means to be told that story again and again and again, and how does that actually shape our responses in that environment, and how does that sort of impact on those sort of outcomes that we're sort of finding. And then I think about what it actually means to not actually be represented in a space that doesn't value our values of old traditions of respecting elders. Also, I know that Harvard has released the most longest longitudinal study about human development. I think it's 80 years long now. And what those white people found in America, surprise, surprise, is that consistently kinship and community, more than any other factor, by the end of a person's life, that is what gives fulfillment and joy. So their whole critique, and I think they released a book this year about what makes a happy sort of life, they've come back to family and kinship. And who does that best is what I'm asking. So do we want to be in spaces just to prove that we can actually do it in a white world, be in these little spaces, or do you want to change those systems? And how do we actually look within those systems? I think that's where I sort of come in. So in terms of your story, does it actually tell that sort of broader systemic sort of story on how islanders are actually living?
Yeah.
Or is it because that might be where those languages kind of intersect?
Girl, I need you to write your own book and
Yeah,
then
I was
come
about
be
to say, I
on
think you
here
need to be sitting up
next
here with us.
year.
I think I meant to kind of repeat the question for broadcast's sake.
Yes.
But okay, here we go. No, to put it simplistically, forgive me if I don't get this right, but yeah, do we, as Pacific Islanders or people of our communities, do we need to thrive in a place that's already set up for us not to succeed?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's breaking down.
yeah, so I
simplistically,
think
as
in
you
my
said.
examples, but we're constantly living in our
advantages and disadvantages every single day. And so whilst there is disadvantages internally in the community that we have to fight against, and that's for us to talk about, we have that advantages of kinship, we have that advantages of oral storytelling, you know, we have that advantages of the fact that, you know, we come from a culture, you know, that really centers, you know, the family unit, and, you know, really centers, you know, generations upon generations together, which, you know, a Western colonial context doesn't do. And then, of course, all the time, especially those of us living in Australia, we are constantly facing systemic issues. Yes, like the written word literature is not made for us. Academic institutions are not made for us. And so, but for me, it's about the fact that some of us have to fight to enter it, to open the doors for others, to make it easier, so then we can transform it. Those spaces shouldn't just be closed off to us forever simply because it doesn't fit our culture or our way of being. We should bring our culture and our way of being into those spaces and change it, because we're only going to improve it. And so for me, I always think about, you know, Australian literature as we know it is usually just, you know, rich white people on a beach, or, you know, bushmen, you know, in the desert, or, you know, in the actual bush, you know, singing Waltzing Matilda, you know, and that's Australian literature. Why is that, you know? And so for me, it's about bringing our culture, bringing that original contribution to knowledge into these spaces so that they are more accessible to us, and then therefore we have more choices. So we're not limited by, you know, white academia about where we are, you know, if we just keep pushing and opening the door. And I say that knowing that I'm going to be an editor of the first Pacific Australian anthology. So, you know, the call out will come out soon. And, you know, for me, I see my role as somebody who chose to write a Tongan Australian story, as somebody who is pushing through a lot of those barriers within and outside my community in order to give every Pacific Islander in this country more choices about their lives.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question? No? Oh, okay. Sorry for everyone else that wanted to ask a question, but maybe they might be sticking around if you want to catch them out and about.
Book signing.
Oh, book signing, yes, please. Go out
At
there
the bookstore.
and purchase and support these artists in any way you can, like purchasing something, seeing them out and about. But yeah, big shout out to ABC, BBC, Red Room Poetry, wonderful people that came out on a Saturday morning. We truly appreciate your presence. And please, party people inside, give a warm ovation to Christine, Daley, Winnie, and Sela.
Thanks, Hau.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay blessed. Thank you.